Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we're going to study this week's portion, which is um, Parshas Balak. And I put out in the email that we're going to talk about tovu, which we are going to do. But I also was brought to my attention that last time I said we were going to talk about the donkey of Bilam, and I forgot to talk about it, or we didn't get to it. So um, I just want to briefly just touch upon something about the donkey, and then we'll go from there and we'll go to Matovu. So the actually the discussion about the donkey of Bilam, the main discussion, appears in several places in the Talmud, but the main discussion of the donkey of Bilam appears in the tractate that we're studying in the Daf Yomi in Avodah Zarah, back in Avodah Zarah, page 4, Daf Dalet Amud Aleph, as it states in the um, verse. We'll go to the bottom. It says in Psalms, "Kel's away mechol yom," that God has His wrath every day. And the Gemara says, "Kama zamo," how long is the wrath of God for? So it's a rega. It's just for a moment. The kama rega, how much is a moment? The Talmud says, "Achas michamesh ribo u'shloshes alafim u'shmona meos v'arba'im u'shmona b'shah." Meaning to say, the time of a moment is one uh, one out of 53,848 48th of an hour. That's what's considered to be a rega, an instant, a moment. No creature was able to determine that moment of God's anger in the world, with the exception of Bilam Harasha. What's mean Bilam Harasha? Now, Bilam Harasha had this skill. His skill was that he knew exactly the moment where God was upset. What a skill to have. And so therefore he knew to curse the Jewish people at that exact moment. That was his special superpower. As it states with respect to Bilam Sive Viodea Das Elyon. It says that Bilam knew the Das Elyon, the knowledge of God. It means to say he had a special knowledge of God himself. And Tosfos says he didn't get this through a prophecy. He didn't. He just had this, and the Talmud's going to show, because he wasn't so intuitive. He didn't even understand his own donkey. He didn't even know his donkey, but he had some special power that he was able to determine, and it doesn't tell us how, but it wasn't through a prophecy. He knew the very moment in the day where God was upset, and so for there, he knew the moment that God got upset, and as a consequence of knowing this moment, he was able to bring God's wrath upon the people who he cursed. So the Talmud asks, how could it be? Afshar das behemto lo havayada. How could it be that Bilam knew God's knew about God when he didn't even know the mind of his own animal, the mind of an animal? Das el yomi havayada. Is it possible that how's it possible that he knew about about God when he didn't even know the knowledge of his own animal? So therefore the Talmud is saying he didn't really know God. He just knew that moment where God got upset. When the verse says Bilam knew the Das Elyon, doesn't mean that he knew God. It means he knew the moment where God got upset, because how could we say he knew God? He didn't even know his own donkey. So since he didn't even know the das, the mind of his own donkey, how could it be that he knew the mind of God? And so now the Talmud is going to prove that he didn't really know the mind of his own donkey. And so therefore he couldn't have known the mind of God. He just knew the moment that God was upset. That was all he knew. And what does it mean? And he didn't know the mind of his own animal? It means he didn't even know the mind of the donkey. as the Talmud says. Now, so what does it mean? It means my das b'em tolo aviyada. What does it mean when it says that Bilam did not know the mind of its animal? It doesn't mean he doesn't know what the animal is thinking. That can't be what it means. But it means that he didn't know when his animal was seeing the angel on the side of the road. Because be'inna de chazaway, at the moment that the princes of Moab saw Bilam, at that moment, that Bilam was riding on his donkey. Amrlo, the princes of Moab, said, "My time asusya." He said, "Why aren't you riding on a horse? Why are you riding on a donkey and not on a horse?" Meaning, a horse is quicker. In those days, horses were used primarily for transportation, less so for work. And so a horse is quicker. So why aren't you riding a horse? Why are you riding a donkey? So the so Bilam answers, Biritiva Shadila. He said, "No, I can't be riding a horse because I left my own horse in the swamp so that it could graze today. I gave it the day off. And so therefore I didn't have my horse around. And so therefore I'm riding a donkey, not a horse." And so that was his response. So immediately the donkey started to speak. Miyad vatomer aton. The donkey started to speak to Bilam. No, sorry. Hello, anochi atoncha. He says the donkey the full verse is the donkey said to Bilam, "I'm your donkey that you rode upon me from when you got me until now. Did I ever do anything wrong for you?" So the donkey says, "I'm your donkey." Meaning to say, I'm your donkey that you usually use. Not like you said that this one time you're riding on me because you send your horse out to the swamp. I ride on you. You ride on me every day. Amar, so Bilam responds to the donkey, "No, Tina ba'alma, no. You just carry packages. That's why you were there. You were in front of my home because I have you schlepp things for the purpose of my house, but not like a horse that I usually ride on, and my horse is in the swamp." So the donkey didn't buy it. The donkey said, the donkey said, "Asher rachavtalai, you rode on me. You've ridden on me in the past. This is not the first time. And it's not like you argue that you're just using me to carry packages." Amar Bilam responded to the donkey, "Akrai ba'alma, yeah, I've ridden on you in the past, but only once in a while, but not as a consistent practice." Amrole, so the donkey responds back to Bilam, meaning to say, "No, I'm your regular mode of transportation. You always ride on me." And not only that, so the donkey then says, "Not only do you ride upon me, but also during the day you ride upon me, and at night you basically I'm your wife at night. You use me as your partner in the bedroom." And how do we know that the donkey really said that? Because the same word that the young donkey uses here is haskein hiskanti, and this word also appears in Kings when it talks about David having a woman lie with him in bed. It's called a sochanes. And we see that the word haskein hiskanti is an expression of intimacy in the bedroom. And so, therefore, the donkey says to Bilam, "What are you talking about? You don't ride on me regularly. We're together in the bedroom every night. And in addition to using me during the day as your transportation, I'm your wife at night." So we see from here, when it says that Bilam did not even know the mind of the animal, he didn't even know what the animal was going to respond to him. Meaning to say, he didn't even know how the animal would have a response to the donkey would have a response to all of his suggestions. And so for sure, if he couldn't know the mind of the donkey, for sure he couldn't know the mind of God. And so if that's the case, what does it mean when it says that Bilam knows the mind of God? That Bilam knew how to find the exact moment where God was upset. He knew that. And this is what it says in the prophet Micha. The prophet says to the Jewish people, "Ami, my people, Zecharna Mayatz Balak Moab so Bilam ben Baor Minei Shitim Vada Gilgal Man Da Tzikos Hashem." Remember what the counsel of Balak, the king of Moab, was, what advice he sought, and what Bilam responded to him in order to know the Tzidkos Hashem. So says Rabbi Lazar, God says to the Jewish people, look how many good things, Ra Kama, Ra'u Kama Tzidakos Asiti Mechem. Look how much good things I did for you. That I didn't get angry at you all those days. Because if I would get upset at you, there would have been nobody left. And that's why it says, Bilam says to Balak, Ma Kov will cover El, also in our portion. He says, what can I curse that God is not cursed? How can I get God upset if God himself is not going to be upset? Meaning to say that even though Bilam knew that moment, he wasn't able to enforce it at that moment. And that's the teaching. So anyway, we see from here, and this is what I want to make. The point was that Bilam is represented here, and according to this text, as he knew he had certain special spiritual powers, but those spiritual powers only allowed him to do damage and harm. They weren't genuine. They weren't inherent to his nature. He only knew a way to get God to curse the people, and yet God withstood it. And in order to demonstrate that he really didn't have any power, this is made clear by the fact that he didn't even know what the donkey was thinking. He didn't even know how he was bested in a debate with the donkey. And the Talmud then goes on. We don't have to do it, but the Talmud says the exact moment where God gets angry every day. The exact moment is with it's a one moment in one of the first 3 hours of the day. And what's the moment? In case anybody wants to know, to always be on your best behavior during that moment. Ki chivra karbalta de tarnagola, when the crown of the rooster turns white and isn't so red. So the Gemara says, isn't it always white? No, usually it has some streaks of red, but this moment there's no streaks of red. The Talmud, I'll just tell you one story about this in the Talmud. Talmud says Rabbi Shimon Levi was upset. There was a certain heretic in the town, or maybe an early Christian who they were fighting with, who was harassing him. So what did Rabbi Shimon Levi did? He took this rooster and he put it next to his bed, and he was looking at it. He said, when it comes to that moment where God is getting upset, what I'll do is I'll curse this person, and that will cause God's wrath to come down upon him. But when it came to that moment where it was all set to curse the person, he fell asleep. He missed his moment. And he said, I see from here, it's not appropriate for me to do this. Because it says in the verse, Rachamav al kol ma'asav, God's mercy is on all his creatures. And it says, also it's not appropriate for a righteous person to punish other people. It says in Proverbs, Gava anot shel tzadik tov. It's not good for a righteous person to punish other people. Anyway, this is the story about Bilam's donkey in the Daf Yomi. I'll just pause for a moment, see if anybody has any questions. Anybody have any questions about this? So we continue to discuss the probably the most famous verse in our portion, maybe one of the most famous in the entire Torah, is the verse that appears in Parashas Balak, is the verse in chapter 24, where it states, hold on one second, I want to read it. Okay, it says that Bilam, it says, Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, mishkenosecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, and your dwelling places, O Israel. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places are, O Israel. And Rashi says two main explanations about this. What are the two main explanations about this? The first explanation is based upon the Gemara in Baba Basra Samach Amabez 60b, or 60a, excuse me. Gemara in Baba Basra says, what does it mean? Why is Bilam looking at their tents and saying, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob? Al Shara Pislayam Shaina Mekuvanim that they weren't able to, he saw that their entrances into their tents were not directly opposite each other, that their dwelling places were private, that they respected the privacy. This is based upon the Gemara in Baba Basra, Samach Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says in Baba Basra, Samach Amud Aleph, the Gemara tells us that a person will yiftach adam lechatzer hashutzin petach keneged petach. Let's say you share a courtyard with somebody else, and there was always a wall there. You can't suddenly decide to open up a window. Meaning to say, if there wasn't a right, if you didn't have a right to open up a window, you're not allowed to all of a sudden make a window. Today we have zoning laws, so the zoning law is dictated, but in those days they didn't have an official zoning code. So the point was, you can't put in new windows because you're violating their privacy. And if it was a small window, you can't make it bigger. What's the source for this idea that you're not allowed to make a window bigger, a window in a place where there wasn't a window? Rashi cites this Gemara on the verse Matovu, but actually the Talmud says it a little bit earlier. It says, what's the source? Rabbi Yochanan, this verse is learned out the Amar Kra. It says, Vayisa Bilam Eseina. Bilam lifts up his eyes, Vayar Yisrael Shochein L'Shvatav, and he sees the Jewish people dwelling by each of their tribes. And he says, Ma Ra'ah. What did Bilam see? Ra'ah Shem Ein Pislei Oleihem Mekuvanim Tozeh. So that their tents were not looking each into the other person's tent. He says, oh, these people are very much worthy that the divine presence should rest upon them. And because he noticed their modesty. And that's why he says, Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkanosecha Yisrael. The Jewish people, says the Talmud, is compared to like a shared partnership of courtyards because there wasn't a public domain. So we see from here that you have to respect their privacy. That was what he joined. Bruce, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was trying to put my hand up a while ago when I messed up. Did I understand?
This was the first explanation of Rashi, that Bilam noticed the power of Am Yisrael, the power of modesty of Am Yisrael, that they were discreet and they were not taking away other people's privacy. Then Bilam gives a second, then Rashi, gives a second answer, or a second explanation. Davar acher, what does it mean to be? What does it mean to be? And here he's quoting not the Gemara in Baba Basra, but the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Kufay Amud Beis. He says, Matovu olecha Yaakov, Matovu oel Shiloh. How beautiful are the tents, Shiloh and the Beit HaMikdash, the eternal house, B'Yishuvan, when they were built. Shemakrivim b'hen karbonos l'chaper alehem. These places were so beautiful that sacrifices were brought in them to atone for the Jewish people. So Matovu olecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple. It was an atonement for the Jewish people. And then Mishkenotecha, what does that mean? Even when they're destroyed, it's also beautiful for the Jewish people. Because they serve as a pledge, a security for the Jewish people. And even when they were destroyed, they served as like an atonement for the Jewish people. Kapara nefashot, an atonement for their lives, as it says, Kila Hashem et chamato. How did God expend his anger? Vayatzet Eish B'Tzion, God destroyed Zion, God destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, and thereby saved the Jewish people. Would say that this Sunday we start the fast of the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av. We want to point out that it was an amazing thing that, according to this Rashi, that the temple was destroyed because it saved the Jewish people. Otherwise, God would have brought his anger upon the Jewish people. And so here too we look at the Gemara here. Let's see what Rashi is referring to. Rashi is referencing even more explicitly in the next Rashi, a passage in Sanhedrin 105b. A passage in Sanhedrin 105b. There the Gemara goes on to discuss the actions of Bilam. Actually, the Gemara there does, in fact, repeat the story here of his donkey. It goes into more length with it. It also discusses more about Bilam. But it says, I don't know if we'll go through that. Maybe if we finish everything we have about Matovu, we can go back. But here the Talmud says the following. It says, Bilam got up early in the morning. Vayakam Bilam baboker vayachavosh esatano. Bilam got up in the morning to saddle his donkey. Tana mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Ahava mevatelet shura shel gedula. Love nullifies the line of greatness. Meaning to say, if the person is great, but he's in love, he's going to get rid of the protocol to express his love. And the source from that is from Abraham. Vayash came Avram baboker. Avram got up to saddle his own donkey. But also hatred is such a powerful force that it also will overcome protocol. Sina mevatelet shura shel gedula. And what's the source for that? It's Bilam. It says, Vayakam Bilam baboker vayachavosh esatano. He got up in the morning to saddle his donkey. Then the Talmud says, Amarav Yehuda, Amarav, La'olam, Yasok Adam Torah Mitzvah Fil Shelo Lishma. A person should always study Torah and do commandments, even if it's not for the purest of purposes, even if he's not doing it for the sake of heaven. Because eventually, Shemitoch Shelo Lishma, eventually, if he does it not for the purest of purposes, he will come to do it for the right purposes, Balashma. How do you know this? Because Balak brought 42 sacrifices at the direction of Bilam. And because he brought those 42 sacrifices, and his intent really was just to curse the Jewish people, nevertheless, Zacha v'yatze mimenu Ruth, he merited to have Ruth the Moabite come from Balak, and Amar Yossi bar Yehuda, Ruth bito shel Egov ben beno shamach Moabita. And Ruth was the granddaughter. She was the daughter of Eglon and who was himself the grandson of the king of Moab. So she was the great granddaughter of Balak, was Ruth. So now we're going to start talking about Matovu. So the Talmud discusses this almost in the context of King Shlomo. So says Rava to Rava bar Maria, it says with respect to the verse that the servants of David said to David, after he commanded them to appoint his son Solomon as king, they said, Yetav Elokim et Shem Shlomo mishmecha v'yigadel et kiso mikisecha. They say, may Solomon's name be greater than yours, and may his throne be greater than yours. And the Talmud questions this. Is this appropriate to say? Orach ara l'meimra hachi? Is this appropriate l'meimra l'malka hachi? Is this appropriate to say to a king that may your son be greater? Amarle may ein kamarle. Meaning they didn't say that his name should be greater, but rather it should be like yours. Because so we're saying when you say somebody should be greater, it means he should be like you. And the proof for this is Tivorach minashim Yael eshet achaver akeni minashim ve'ol tivorach. The verse says in Judges chapter 5, verse 24, that Yael, who killed Sisera, in the Song of Songs and the Song of Deborah and the Shiras Devorah, it says that Yael should be more blessed than the women of the tent. And who are the women of the tent? Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And so is it appropriate to say that she should be more blessed, but rather means she should be like them? That's what it's saying. She should be like them. And all of a sudden, we suddenly see another reference to a tent. It says, because we don't know why is this passage in the Gemara, but rather must be, in my opinion, it's the connection to Matovu Olecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents? Means to say our tents are supposed to be like the women of the tent. Who are the women of the tent? Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Anyway, the Talmud then continues and says that God put words into the mouth of Bilam. So what does that mean? Vayosem davar b'fi Bilam. Rabbi Eliezer says, Malach, that it wasn't God, but it was an angel. And an angel was sent by God to make sure Bilam did not curse the Jewish people. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, God put a hook basically to keep his mouth shut so that he wouldn't be allowed to curse. And so says Rabbi Yochanan, from the blessing of that wicked one, and Rashi cites this on a portion, you learn what was in his heart. He bikesh that because what happened was all of his blessings start off as curses, and God switched them into blessings. So we see from the blessings what the curse was, what he had in mind. When it says, Bikesh Omar Shaloyu and Bate Kinesiot Bate Midrashot. He request, and this is the third approach to Matovu. The first is Matovu refers to the tents, that they were modest. The second refers to the fact that it's a reference to the Beis HaMikdash being the most beautiful place to worship, and then it served as a collateral for the Jewish people, meaning to say that God punished the Jewish people by destroying the temple and not destroying them. And now we come to the third approach. What's the third approach? Bilam's goal was to say, to curse the Jewish people that they couldn't have synagogues and batei midrashos, places to study, yeshivas. And so God turned his words and flipped them over. And how do we know that? Because it says, Matovu olecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. And according to the Targum, this Targum Yonasan, this refers to how beautiful are your batei midrashos, how beautiful are your yeshivas, how beautiful are your study halls, because the verse says, Kama Yavun Hinun Batei Midrachon. How beautiful are your Batei Midrashim. That's how the Targum understands this. How beautiful are your base medrash, your yeshivas. Lo Tishra Shechina Aleim. He wanted that their divine presence should not rest upon them. So Hashem turned his words over. It says, Mishkino Secha Yisrael. Your dwelling place is Israel, meaning to say, what does it mean? That the divine presence should rest upon you. Mishkinosecha, the Shechina should rest upon you. He wanted Shalote Machusan Nimsheches. He wanted that their kingdom should not last. So he says, Nitayu. No, it will be planted like a stream that never stops. He wanted that there should never be olives and vineyards, and so it goes on. Anyway, the point I wanted to make from here was that Matovu is a third approach. That the first approach refers to their tents. Second approach is it refers to the Beit HaMikdash, and the third approach is that Bilam was blessing their batei midrashos, their yeshivos, and their synagogues. And in fact, the Gemara concludes, Amar Rav Abba bar Kahana, Kulam chazru l'klala. All of these blessings of Bilam, in the end, became a curse, and they were fulfilled exactly like he had in mind, meaning to say that they wouldn't have a kingdom, that they wouldn't have olive trees and vineyards, that they wouldn't have kings of stature. and that their kings will not rule over the nations. All of these, even though he blessed them, they became the curses, which were his original intent, with the exception of one of his original tents. He wanted to curse the Jewish people that they would never have synagogues or yeshivas. And this never happened. We've always had synagogues and batei midrashos. We've always had synagogues and yeshivas. As it states, "Vayafoch Hashem el kecha l'chas hakol avracha yavcha Hashem el kecha." God will turn your curse into a blessing. It doesn't say your curses, but your curse. So this one curse of Bilam never came true. It became the blessing. And the Jewish people always had in our history, we've never had a time where we haven't had a synagogue or a base midrash or a yeshiva. In that context, we could say maybe this is the reason why tovu is the very first thing we say in our liturgy. You open up your siddur, and it says, the first thing it says, when you come into the synagogue, on entering the synagogue, you say, I don't have the liberal denomination siddurim. Actually, I do. I could check to see if they do it too, but it's pretty universal. On entering the synagogue, that's the first thing we say when entering the synagogue. Ma tovu olecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Why is that the first thing we say? When we come into a synagogue, we're saying a curse from a wicked man. Bilam, who was a wicked man. That's the first thing we're saying. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Because this is a testament to this blessing having been fulfilled, that we have always had yeshivas, we've always had synagogues, we've always had places to study and to daven. And so we're basically saying, when we come in the morning and we enter into the synagogue, this is what we say. We say that we have fulfilled this blessing, and this blessing is not turned into a curse. Once we are talking about what we're supposed to have in mind when we enter into the synagogue, I should mention the idea. What are we supposed to have in mind? Does anybody know what we're supposed to have in mind when we walk into the synagogue to pray for the very first time? Every day, what are we supposed to have in mind when we walk in to pray? Does anybody know what our intent should be? I want to make sure that people know this, because it's very, very important. So it says, first, let me read from the Magen Avram. I cited Magen Avram's introduction to Siman Mem Vav to 46. He says the following. Hold on one second. I'm going to pull it up. It's on my phone. He says the following. Magen Avram, Rabbi Avram Gambiner in the 17th century, he says the following. He says, before Kodem Bola Beisa Knesset, before a person comes into the synagogue, he should say, Yomar Vani Berov Chazdecha Avo Beisecha. He should say that verse from Psalm chapter 5. And when he comes into the synagogue, he should say, he should say it with emotion. And before he davens the morning prayers, he should accept upon himself the positive commandment. He should accept upon himself the positive commandment of loving your neighbor like you love yourself, the positive commandment of ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Meaning to say, this goes hand in hand with the idea that Matovu is the first verse that we say. What's the reason? Because we're talking about your beautiful tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. And when we're going into a synagogue, the synagogue or a yeshiva, the whole purpose of being there is that we can't be by ourselves. Because if we would be by ourselves, we wouldn't need other people to be able to pray. So we're praying with others. And so therefore you're saying this idea, you're saying, in addition to the fact that you're testifying to the fact that the curse of Bilam did not happen, that the synagogues are still in existence, you're also supposed to have in mind that we are a tent together. How beautiful is your tent, that we are a tent. And so therefore have in mind, every person should take upon themselves to have in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor like you love yourself. Elaine, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want
once we mention what the Magen Avram says as an introduction, I want to talk about, just read it briefly so we should be aware what also the oh, did Joyce, were you trying to say something? Did I cut you off?
Well, no, you didn't cut me off. I have a question.
Sure. I wanted to, since we're talking about having to fulfill a mitzvah, loving your neighbor like you love yourself, when you walk into the synagogue in the morning or whenever you walk into yeshiva to daven with other people, I want to cite in this context a story that's told about my great uncle, the brother of Rabbi Elimelech, Reb Zusha. So Reb Zusha is known for his tremendous heart and compassion, but he wasn't always like that. So the story is told that when Reb Zusha was he was youthful and he was in his purist mode. He was very, he was young and on edge. And so he was studying with his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Maggid of Mezrich was a great leader, and many people were coming to visit him. So one of them came before the Rebbe, and he was making he was pouring out his heart about on a topic, and he was requesting the Rebbe to pray for him. Reb Zusha looked closely at this man and at his face, and he saw this is a tremendous sinner. He said, this guy is not repenting. There's not like 1 ounce of tshuva in this person. So hold on to your seats, because we said 3 explanations of tovu. We're about to get to a 4th. So when Reb Zusha saw this guy who was not repenting, he had a chutzpah to come and take up the Rebbe's time and make demands that the Rebbe have him in mind in his prayers. He got so angry, and he said to this person, a guy like you that violates sin after sin and never ever has even a thought of repentance, how did you have the chutzpah, the audacity to come and stand before our holy teacher? How are you here even in the first place? How dare you? You're a sinner. You don't even look to do teshuvah, and you're coming here taking up the Rebbe's time. When the person heard his rebuke, he was incredibly embarrassed and ashamed, and he left the Rebbe's presence like desolate, devastated. When Reb Zusha saw this, he immediately regretted what he said, and he never was able to forget about that moment that he said. When the Magen of Mezrich says, the Magen of Mezrich called over Reb Zusha, and he said to him, Ma tovu oalecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, Jacob. What does that mean? He blessed him that from this point on, he'll only see the good in everybody from the Jewish people, even if he's filled with sins. And that is something that Reb Zusha shared with Reb Elimelech. And Reb Elimelech also has a prayer to say before you go into synagogue. And that prayer is that he prayed that you would only see the best qualities of our friend, of our chaverim, and not, God forbid, their worst qualities. And this is what the Magen Mezrich said to Reb Zusha is the meaning of Ma Tovu. Look, you see only the good. Even if he's filled with sins, you have to see the good. You find the good. And that's the 4th explanation. So let me just do chazara on the 4 explanations of Ma Tovu that we discussed today. The first is it's an expression of modesty, that the Jewish people's tents were discreet and modest. The second is it's an expression of referring to the Beis HaMikdash, that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed so that we could be saved. This is the time of the 3 weeks coming up, but that was a blessing that we were saved. The third is that it refers to the synagogues and the study halls. And it's saying that there will always be synagogues and study halls. And the fourth is this idea from Reb Zusha and Reb Elimelech that when you come in to pray, you have to make sure you only see the best qualities, only the good, and you don't look for the bad. Now, those are the four approaches to Tovu. We'll stop here. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to address.